Welcome to Drive the Daf, clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Eruvin Daf Nun Aleph begins with a discussion of how you are allowed to set up an Eruv where you aren't, where you're not using bread, you're just saying my Eruv should be somewhere. Why does that work? Then the Gemara moves on to discuss our 2,000 Amma limits to an Eruv and what the sources for that are. The Gemara discusses whether or not there are corners to the Eruv, whether it's a round area or a square area. Then the Gemara gets to the Machlokes of Meir and Rav Yehuda as to whether you can use a different method if you have bread, and the Machlokes of Nachman and Rav Chizda as to which other method they are arguing about and which one they both agree to, and that'll take us the rest of the daf. First, the Gemara brings the halacha that was said by Rava. We had seen in the Mishnah that you're allowed to choose a spot further along the way and identify that as the center of your tchum. That's your makom shvisa for Shabbos. So the question is not asked explicitly, but how could you say that that's your tchum? How could you say that that's your makom shvisa? You're not there, you're here. You have to either be there or place food there. So you're just saying that's my spot? So Gemara says, Rava says that the reason you're allowed to do that is because you're close enough that you should be able to run and reach that spot before Shabbos begins. Therefore, you could, if you say that that's my makom shvisa, since you could get there, it counts as if you did get there. So Abaya asks, what do you mean? The Mishnah says that it's getting nightfall on him. Night is falling. It's becoming Shabbos as we speak. Obviously, he can't run anywhere and get anywhere. So there's two versions as to what Rava answered. One is that he said it's night is falling, Shabbos is beginning, so that he won't be able to get home before Shabbos, but he could get to that spot before Shabbos. Or second version of how Rava said it, and it's a very similar answer, as Rava said, the night is falling, Shabbos is beginning, so that he can't get to that spot where he wants to set up his makom shvisa by walking, but he could get there by running. Now the Gemara brings an incident that happened. Rabba and Rav Yosef were walking along the way, and they needed to set up our makom shvisa somewhere. So Rabba said to Rav Yosef, do you know that tree? There's a certain tree that leans on another tree. That's a good spot. Let's set up our shvisa over there. Or according to a different version, he didn't say the tree leans on another tree. He said that there's a tree that saves its owner from having to pay the taxes, the head taxes, because it produces a lot of fruit and that covers the cost of the taxes. Either way, Rav Yosef said, I don't know the tree. You're describing it very nicely. I'm not familiar with it, so I can't use it as my makom shvisa. And Rabbi said, no, but you could rely on the fact that I know it, because we saw in the Brisa that Rav Yossi says that if two people are walking and one of them knows the spot, the other one could give over his rights to define a makom shvisa to him, and then he will define a makom shvisa for both of them based on a place that he knows. So Gemara just points out that Brisa is not really Rav Yossi. Rabba told Rav Yosef that it's Rav Yossi, but it's not Rav Yossi. It was a stam. It was said without a name. And the reason why Rabba said that it was Rav Yossi is because he wanted Rav Yosef to feel confident in the psak, which was a true psak anyway, but he wanted Rav Yosef to feel confident in the psak. And we know that Rav Yossi, almost always the halacha is like him, because he's nimuko ima, his reasons are always there, ready to back him up. Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah and asks, how do we know the halacha of 2,000 amos altogether? Who said that a tchum is 2,000 amos in any direction? Where to get the number 2,000 from? So the Gemara says, like I was seen earlier, we learned the halachas of tchumen from the pasuk that Moshe Rabbeinu said to Klal Yisrael after the incident with the mun. He said, "Shuish mekayim b'yom mashat." He said, "Shuish tachtov b'yom mashat," and then he said, "Al yetzi ishmi mekaymoi." Person should not go out of his place. So we're going to link this word mekaymoi. A person should not go out of his place. What is his place? We're going to define mekaymai by a 4-step gzeira shava, a chain of 4 different links, to a pasuk describing the range outside the city of Levium, where there was a migrash, open area left outside the cities of the Levium, and that range was 2,000 amos. What's the 4 steps of the Shava? So here it says makom. It says al yetzei ishmi mekaymai, and then in a pasuk about Arya Miklat, it also says makom. It says v'samti l'cha makom esher Yonos shama. There you also have the word Yonos, so that links to a different pasuk where it says Es gvul ir miklotoi asher Yonos shama. So you link Yonos to Yamos. This pasuk has the word gvul in it. That word gvul links to the next chain, where we say michutz legvul ir miklotoi. It has the word gvul. It also has the word chutz, and chutz links us to the last pasuk, which is about the migroshe halavim, and it says umadaisa michutz leiras pesach kedma alpayim ba'ama. So it's makam to makam. That makam has a nisa to nisa. That nisa has a gvul. It's gvul to gvul. That last gvul has a chutz, and then it's chutz to chutz, and the last pasuk has chutz, and it says 2,000 amas. So Gemara says there's a different pasuk with chutz and a different measure. There is a pasuk that says mikir ha'ir v'chutz lo elef amma. It says the word chutz, and it also says 1,000 amas. So how do you know to learn to the first pasuk and it's 2,000 amas, learn to the second pasuk and it's 1,000 amas? Where it says the second pasuk doesn't say chutz, it says chutza. You don't learn from chutz to chutza. Where it says no, you can't learn from similar words. It has to be the exact word. It's not true. We have Gzera Shava and Hilchos Negoyim, Tsaras, on houses. It says Vishav HaKayin, Uba HaKayin. The Kayin goes back and the Kayin comes. Those are two similar words, and we make Gzera Shava between the two. So you see that you could link two similar words, even if they're not even the same word at all. So chutz and chutza you could for sure link. So Gemara says, yeah, okay, you're right. If you have only one choice, you could link when they're similar. But here you have chutz, and you want to link it to either chutz or to chutza. Which one should we link it to? Obviously, we link it to the exact word chutz instead of to the not exact word chutza. In light of that, the Gemara asks, how do you understand the machlokes between Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos and the Chachamim, which we saw in the Mishnah? Their machlokes was these 2,000 amas are measured as a circle with a 2,000 amma radius, or is it a square that's 2,000 amas from the center to each edge and much longer to the corners? So Gemara said, how could Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos say that it's a circle? We learned the 2,000 amas out of the pasuk describing the migrash around the cities of the Leviim, and there it says pa'as. It says corner. Pa'as kedma payam ba'ama. It's got to be corners. How can you tell me that it's round? It's a circle. There's got to be corners there. So Gemara says it's not a problem. Chanina ben Antignos will tell you because it says Zeh lilchem migrashei ha'arim. Zeh lahem migrashei ha'arim. This is how it'll be for the cities of Leviim. That excludes other things. It limits the concept of corners to the migrashei ha'arim. But the Tchumin don't have to have corners. Zeh says it only applies here. The corners doesn't apply anywhere else. Gemara says, what are the Rabbanim going to do with that? So Gemara says, they say that Drasha the other way. Reb Chananya brings a brisa. There's a brisa with Chumnani in it. And Reb Chananya says that Zeh says this, what we see here about the Migrashei Ha'arim, that there's corners, that applies to all of Hilchos Shabbos. You have to have corners in all the measurements and the shapes and the sizes of Shabbos. There should all be corners. They should all be square measurements, not round measurements. What does this include? So Rav Rabbi Yaakov says it includes somebody who carries an object 4 amas. He's not violating Hilchos Shabbos until he carries it 5.6 amas. Why? Because 4 amas is going to a square, to the edge of a square. From where he is to the edge of the square is 4 amas. To the diagonal, to the corner of the square, is always 2/3 longer. So that would be 5.6 amas. So it's really 5.6 amas, not 4 amas. On a similar note, Rav Papa said, we once were tested by Rava, and he asked us, when you have a tall column in Rosh Hashanah, that column, we said, counts as the Rosh Hashanah. So let's say it's a square column. So we know it has to be 4 tfachim by 4 tfachim. So does that only apply to square columns or also round columns? Meaning, do you need the corners to be a Rosh Hashanah? It has to be 4 by 4 with corners, or is it enough as if it's a round column with a diameter of 4 tfachim and 4 tfachim? So on that, we answered him, says Rav Papa, that this is the exact quote of the Brisa from Rav Chananya. He said that the word Zeh comes to teach us that corners applies to all of the measurements in Hilchos Shabbos. Gemara now refers to the next part of the Mishnah, where we had a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, whether a person who could afford bread, somebody who has bread to use to make an Erev, is he allowed to use another method of making an Erev, or does he have to use bread? Is bread an additional option, or is bread the main option and you shouldn't use something else if you have the bread? So we had said it was a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir had said, if you have bread, you have to use it. And Rabbi Yehuda said, no, bread is something you could use, but if you want, you could use a different option also. So what is the machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda? What other option Or are they arguing about? There were two cases in the Mishnah. The Mishnah had somebody who was trying to make an Erev where he is. He's saying, I'm making an Erev now where I am. He's making an Erev by standing there. And the beginning of the Mishnah had somebody who's trying to make an Erev by saying, that place down there, under that tree, that's going to be my Erev. So that means that there are three ways of making an Erev here. There's making an Erev with bread. There's making an Erev with your feet by standing there. And then there's making an Erev by saying, that's my spot. Which one are they arguing whether you're allowed to do it if you have bread? Are they arguing about whether you can make an Erev by standing there? The Rav Meir says you can't make an Erev standing there if you have bread to use, and Rav Yehuda says no, even if you have bread, making an Erev by standing there is the main way of making an Erev, and you can do it even if you have bread. Or does everybody agree that you can make an Erev by standing there even if you have bread? The machlokes is, can you make an Erev by saying, I want my Erev to be in X spot? You're allowed to do that even if you have bread, and just not put your bread there, just rather say, can I make my Erev in X spot? So according to Rav Chizda, the machlokes is about speaking. Rav Meir says, you can't say my Erev is going to be somewhere. If you have bread, you should go put the bread there, or send the bread with somebody there. And according to Rav Yehuda, you can't. That's what the machlokes of Meir and Rav Yehuda is, but everybody agrees that if you're actually standing in a place, you can make it your Erev. That is no issue. According to Rav Nachman, no, the machlokes is about that also. Machlokes is about when you're standing in a place, is that considered a valid way of making an Erev and using bread as an additional option, or is using bread the main option and you can't rely on where you're standing if you have bread that you're supposed to use? Now, how do you read the rest of the Mishnah? So the Mishnah had two phrases there that we have to fit in. First of all, it said, "V'zui sha'amru ha'ani ma'arev baraglav." This is the classic case of making an Erev by without using bread, and it's only somebody who can't afford bread. So obviously that has to be Rav Meir, because Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that there's such a thing that you have to use bread. So that's Rav Meir. The question is, which case is he saying that? He's saying that in the case of somebody wants to make an Erev by speaking, is saying my Erev should be somewhere, and on that we say that if you have bread you can't do that. That's how Rav Chizda would understand Rav Meir. And according to Rav Nachman, it would be no. That's even where the guy is actually standing there and he says, I want this to be my Erev. We say to him, no, you could afford bread. You have to go and use bread. You can't say, well, I'm just going to do it without bread. Now, the last line of the Mishnah says the opposite. It says that bread is just supposed to help you. It's supposed to be an additional option. It's not supposed to make things harder for you. So who's talking there? So according to Rav Chizda, everybody agrees to this. Everybody agrees that the place where you're standing works to make an Erev. You don't have to do anything else. The whole argument was if you want to say something, and you want to say my Erev's over there. But everybody agrees, if I'm standing here, this could be my Erev. So then everybody would agree to this last line. Rav Yehuda, Rav Meir, everybody. But according to Rav Nachman, no, this is itself part of the argument. This is one of the things they were arguing about. So it would be Rabbi Yehuda who would say that you can, if you're standing there, that's fine, that's enough. Then Rabbi Meir would argue on that last line of the Mishnah. Now brings a brisa which explicitly learns the machlokes of Meir and Rabbi Yehuda like Rav Nachman. The brisa says clearly that you could have both a person who has been a person that does not have bread is allowed to make an Eruv with his feet by traveling to where he needs to be, and then he can say, this is the place of my Eruv. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda, but according to Rabbi Meir, it's only a poor person who doesn't have bread who could do that, but everybody could use bread. Whoever wants to use bread is a valid option, it's the best option, and that's what they should be able to do for everyone. So that's clearly the machlokes explained like Rav Nachman explained it. And the brisa continues, and Rabbi Yehuda brings a support to himself. He says there was an incident that happened with the people from the town of Memel and the people from the family of Memel and the family of Guryon in the town of Aroima that used to give out dried figs and raisins on Shabbos during the hunger years, and the people wanted to come from far away. So what they would do is that they would make an Erev Tchumen by coming just before Shabbos to stand at the edge of their Tchum, and then that would be the new center of their Tchum, and then they would have 4,000 amas to be able to travel. and then they were able to reach the place where the food was given out. So now you see here that they went and they stood on their own. They didn't leave any food there. They stood there, and that became their new Makom Shvisa. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? They came from their homes. No matter how poor they were, they certainly had some food at home. They could have set up an Erev with food. Obviously, even though you have food, you don't have to use it. It's enough to just go and actually stand there. Now, Rav Ashi says, I have another proof to Rav Nachman's position. From a different Mishnah, which we're going to see soon on Daf Nun Beis. The Mishnah says the following thing. The Mishnah says if a bunch of people go to make an Erev between their city and another city, the Mishnah doesn't specify that it's a lot of people, but it has to be, otherwise it's lacking chiddush here. And they're brought back home. Somebody says it's too cold, and they don't end up actually going, and instead they say our Malkum Shvisa should be between the cities. We should be able to reach the other city on Shabbos. So it only works for one person and not for anyone else. So the Gemara asked why only for him and not for anyone else. The Gemara says he must have a house in the other city, and therefore he was planning on spending Shabbos in that city altogether. He was making the Erev on his way. He was going to stop and set up an Erev Tchumen, but he was planning on spending Shabbos in the other city. Therefore he's not coming home. So he doesn't have food. He is considered somebody who doesn't have food. He's not coming from his house and going back to his house and could have just brought food with him. Therefore, he's considered to be a person without food, and therefore it's okay when he said that spot should be my Erev, it works. He wanted to set up the Erev over there. However, according to the other people, so they didn't have a house there. They were planning on going and coming back. Therefore, they're considered like they have food. If they consider like they have food, it doesn't work for them to go and say, this is where my Erev should be. They have to actually bring food. Gemara now discusses the halacha here. The Gemara says Rav Chia bar Ashi was teaching the son of Rav, whose name was also Chia. He was teaching him this machlekes of Yehuda and Reb Meir. And he said over the machlekes, and Rav said, teach him the halachas like Rabbi Yehuda. That's how he paskin. Now, is that according to Rav Chizda's understanding or Rav Nachman's understanding? So Gemara says, Rabbi bar Rav Chanan used to walk from Artivna to Pumbedisa, and he needed to make an Erev along the way. So while he was sitting in his house, he would say, my Erev should be in Tzimta, a place midway. And Abaye said, what do you mean? How can you do that while you're sitting in your house? You're passing like Rabbi Yehuda, that even though you have bread, you're not using it. But you're passing like Rabbi Yehuda according to Rav Chizda, that you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to, even though you have bread, you're allowed to just say my Erev is somewhere. But that's not the halacha. The halacha is like Rav Nachman. We had a brayso that supported Rav Nachman, that you're only allowed to go make an Erev with your feet. You're not allowed to actually say that the Erev is there, even according to Rabbi Yehuda. So he said, you're right, and I'm chayzer, I'm changing my practice from now on. I'm not going to do that.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.